when we first read about Through the Hedge, or finding the gap through the hedge. I was reminded when Linda and I first started our work with the networks in British Columbia, which is about 15 years ago, we thought of ourselves a little bit as the French resistance, trying to find those cells and those pockets in schools. There's brilliance in all of our schools, but how can we connect them and get that strength together? And what could we accomplish as a group? We also thought of ourselves as operating somewhat underneath the radar, and it's almost a little bit frightening now that we're above the radar and that what has been the resistance is now becoming the main event. And that puts us possibly in a little bit more of a dangerous place. However, my father was the first Canadian commando overseas, so we come from a sturdy stock that are not to be intimidated by anything. So we want to provide 3 perspectives, 1 from our work in British Columbia, 2 from what we're learning from the Whole Education Network and our participation with you, 3rd from our involvement with the OECD and the Innovative Learning Environment Study, and also provide you some considerations as we move forward collectively. So just quickly in terms of metaphor, I want you to take a look at this image. It's called Floating Stones. It's from an environmental photographer, Martin Hill, in New Zealand. And when we were first starting the network, we thought that actually represents what it is we're trying to do. So I'm going to ask for your cooperation, and we'll do it in 30 seconds, just with the person next to you. What is it that you see in that image? And there are 2 things. One comes from the work of Rosabeth Moss-Cantor, who said that leadership is not about it's not about walking on water, it's about creating the foundation so that others can. So that was part 1 for us. And the other part was, in a ripple, you don't know where it's going to go. And as we started this work, we had no idea that 15 years later, we would still be as passionately committed to it as we were at the beginning. And we're seeing the results as well. I'll just flip back to this. Last year, there was a research team from Australia that was commissioned to take a look at what does teacher professional learning look like in high-performing systems. And I want you to remember the 3 remarks that David mentioned. He talked about the quality of teaching, leadership, and the importance of collaboration. Those were the 3 takeaways that I got from your comments. And this report on teacher professional learning is going to be out before Christmas. It's going to be very influential in North America, and it's identified 5 key points across 4 high-performing systems. It's that we need to be inquiry-based, it needs to be professionally led, it needs to take place over time, it needs to be linked and coherent, and there's a 5th point, which I can't remember. But the key thing is that the work that we're seeing here really reflects that. And the 4 high-performing systems were Hong Kong, Singapore, Shanghai, and British Columbia. What we've seen in the last 15 years is that we have actually improved quality and equity, and we're standing on a fairly confident place of saying that our most vulnerable populations are showing the quickest gains. And for us, that's what this work is all about, and it's what the work that you're doing is about. So what have we learned from our 15 years with working with networks in British Columbia? It's the importance of having clear, compelling, shared goals in language that everyday people can use and understand. So for us, our first big goal is that we want to see every learner in our province cross the stage. That means moving from secondary school to adulthood, crossing that stage metaphorically with dignity, purpose, and options. That language came from the schools, it came from the network, and now it's becoming part of provincial policy. The second point that I want to make is that we started with the notion that we want every learner to leave our system more curious than when they arrive. And for that to happen, we need to create the conditions for teachers to be curious. and to unleash their passion. And so how do we create that in our schools? It's coming at it through an inquiry orientation, and the spirals of inquiry has emerged from that work. The third point that we've learned is that we need to be inclusive and not bound by roles. We have a saying within our network that we leave our role at the door and we come in as learners. We've also learned that inclusivity means we're not going to separate primary and secondary schools. We're going to work together as much as we possibly can. The fourth point is around sustaining the momentum through not depending on a ton of resources. We started 15 years ago with $35,000, which is like 18,000 pounds. It wasn't a lot of money. And we've been able to sustain it by doing all kinds of things to cobble together small amounts of money, but we haven't been dependent on large funders or large sources. And for us, I think that's made it difficult sometimes, but it's also been, it's been helpful. And the last thing is around passion and persistence. And I think that one of the things that has struck both Linda and I in our work with the schools through Whole Education Network is the passion that you bring to it and the persistence, despite all of the challenges and obstacles that you've got, that clear belief that together we can make a difference. What we've learned specifically from the work with you in the Whole Education Network, and particularly from the evaluation that Louise Stoll and Julie Timperley have done, which is a superb piece of work that we commend to you, is that context does matter. There are differences between our systems, but learning principles are universal. That at the heart of it, we're all trying to do the same thing. And if we focus on learning and starting with learners and what their needs are and what their experiences are, it moves us much more quickly to a more positive place. We've also learned from you and also from our own work the importance of taking a medium and a long-term view. Both Tim and David talked about this isn't about a quick fix. This is about what is it that we want to accomplish together over the long haul, and how can we demonstrate those gains in a short or medium-term place. And then also just the last point that I'm going to make and turn it over to Linda is the importance of collaboration across roles, the importance of expertise, and the importance of networks that are sustained, supported, and incredibly important. So that's part one.
Are you wondering why there's two of us? My part will be quite short. I think one of the things that Judy and I really believe, and you can see it in the Whole Education Network, which is why we're attracted to the work here, is that we believe in team teaching, team leading. We believe in networks, and we like to model it. So we tend to come to presentations and present together. We think that's a great model, and it's actually made, we now can't imagine ever teaching by ourselves. Too much work. What do you think of that? Really, if one person's tired or mildly hungover, depending on the party, the other person can step forward, which is a really great thing. I know that would never happen with the two of you, but West Coast Canadians are a bit more, badly behaved. I just want to talk for a minute or two about, this. We've been involved, we've been very fortunate to be involved with the international work on learning environments, innovative learning environments through OECD. I know David Istance was here last year. I hope he'll be coming back again. We think his work is absolutely fantastic. Based in Paris, 45 countries looking to innovate their systems in intelligent ways. We call it innovating for good. That is, to try to innovate in ways that it sticks over time, and also it has that quality of equity and making sure that we're pushing on quality all the time. The Nature of Learning is one of the books that we rely on in our province and in the Yukon to guide this work, and David is just getting published his summary of this work. Has anybody looked at that work, the Innovative Learning Environments work online? It's very interesting to see what schools do, and they're so close to you that it would be really easy for you to visit. There's 7 learning principles that have come out of that work. We think they're design principles for looking at your school, for your collection of schools. We were just in North Somerset, and we saw a lot of that work. There's some indigenous work in England, there always has been, that's brilliant. We learned about Learning Without Limits, which we hadn't heard about before, and that's very much reflected in the design principles. We also noticed we got to be one of 5 international learning labs on innovation. It was Peru, New Zealand, British Columbia, French Belgium, and South Africa. And you know what? I know sometimes you look at your system, and we look at it too and think, wow, they're really fierce accountability is a good name for it. People talk about the wolf at their shoulder, particularly in secondary. However, when we were in South Africa this spring, they have some pretty serious challenges too. And New Zealand has what they call a long tail of underachievement with some of their Maori and Pacifica learners. And we have high child poverty in British Columbia and a very bad tradition of fighting between government and the unions that teachers have just gone for 5 weeks without any pay in the last year because they were in industrial job action. I think what we learned from seeing the challenges in different countries is that the one thing that has to take place is that courage in tackling your problems as a team. And I think that's why Whole Education and networks like Whole Education in your country, in my fantasy, you're going to get all these networks together in one place and say, okay, how can we collectively take over our system so that we do have that powerful voice? And that's what we've tried to do. And building on ideas across widely different environments. There's a kind of a global interest now in learners having more agency in their learning. And New Zealand is doing some really interesting work on young people creating visual learning maps with different kinds of arrows. You can, if you're interested, you can give you the reference so you can go online and see it. And then the learners make 2-minute videos about the change in their learning maps as they've learned to be more self-regulated and more powerful. It's really interesting work, and we're trying to bring that back and put it into our work. And certainly with the 70 deputy heads that we met with on Tuesday, who are very interested in this approach to inquiry and very much interested in co-agency and living that. I'd have to say we were deeply impressed with that work and thought that it could be accelerated by looking at this learning map idea from somewhere else. I think in terms of moving forward collectively, both in British Columbia, Canada, and here in England, we now feel we belong to the Whole Education Network. We've become fascinated by it. In terms of metaphors and images, I think from a Canadian perspective, there's still a bit more work to do. I really understand now, Tim, why you were talking about gaps in hedges, and certainly Judy's father was finding gaps in his military experience. There's something about the West Coast sense of humor. When I first heard gaps in hedges, I was looking at the paper this morning and it was talking about, the hedgehog perhaps becoming the national animal of England. And to me, my image was this poor little hedgehog rolling through, a tiny gap, trying somehow to expand it. It didn't sound strong enough somehow to meet the challenge. So I think it would be very interesting before the end of these 2 days, maybe at dinner tonight, to come up with some other metaphors about how we could say, I used to be a squash player. I believe that you have to take the tee, and I think as the profession, that's the place we're at. That's the era. Let's not be on the back foot. Let's grab that center, and maybe whether if the image or the metaphor is got hedges in it or countryside, maybe the powerful leaders that we see in our province and here just seem to be living in a different place. They have a different mindset, and I think somehow we need to capture that. I think we all have to have a perspective, and certainly we saw that at Whole last year and in the work as we've talked to people and seen the coaching notes. We have to move our system to that learning orientation, away from sorting, away from predetermining where young people will go, because it's a very different world. And I think the last thing that we really have to do, or at least what we think we have to do, and what we have done, is right from the beginning of our network, we didn't see it as taking over our system, but we always thought that every school that was part of a networked environment was thinking about the whole province. In your case, thinking about the whole country, and how could things be moved forward in that way. So one of the things to do that holistically, and to do it in the innovation space, we believe that we have to get every single learner, adult and young person, but particularly young people. Our image now would be that every single young person in British Columbia and in the Yukon, regardless of their age, could answer 4 questions. And that first question is, it sounds deceptively simple. Can you name 2 people in this setting who believe you will be a success in life? And that is a very powerful question. It comes out of some very strong research. We know from social and emotional learning that we can lift kids intellectually and academically 11% if we have a relationship with them. In some schools in Vancouver, only 10% of kids could name even 1 person. And in other schools, it was 90%. It has to be 100%. And in our case, we believe it has to be 100% province-wide, and we think it has to be 100% England-wide if we're really going to get where we need to go. The next 3 questions come from the metacognitive literature, and that is, can every young person explain what it is that they're learning? David, if you're on bus duty and you're stopping kids when they come out, what did you learn today in whatever? How is it going for you? And what's your next step to get to be a more powerful learner in that area? When young people can give strong answers to those 4 questions, and we can begin to capture some of that on digital video with our cell phones and make that public in our schools and with our parents, then we think we'll be very much on the right track. So having some simple metrics like that we can control as a profession, we think is going to engage our power. So we're delighted to be here as part of Whole. We'd love to hear your metaphors and your images. You can see from ours, we believe that if you have strong, solid, research-informed learning principles, then the work does ripple out. And I think as long as you stick with it, you have to. How many people, just a show of hands, how many people are prepared to work at this no matter what for the next 15 years? That's what it will take. And hopefully, Tim will be here for another 50, because we'll want to say, you know what, that era, we really got it done. Thanks a lot.